Just a little idea for the men of this church. If you ever want to go fishing and teach a novice like me how to do it, we could plan something like that. Just plant that as an idea. So, let's pray. Let's pray. God, we ask that you would help us to continue to learn as we travel with the church in Philippi. Help us to learn how to live with the expectation of your power. Help us to live with such a community of love that the community around us will be transformed. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, we looked last week at the beginning of the book of Philippians, and we looked at how Paul began, and last week I mentioned that Philippians is one of those verses that has probably per capita, probably more of those little verses that you'll find on coffee cups and on plaques and different things than pretty much any other book. So last week the one that would have been the little coffee cup verse would have been, "He who began a good work in you will complete it." And so Paul starts out with that confidence, and we talked about that confidence that that church was not even Paul's idea, it was God's idea, as God led them to Macedonia, to Philippi. And as they got there, they saw God's power be the one that built the church. And so Paul was saying there's something great going on there, that God's power is showing up, you're used to depending upon God to build the church, and the thing that's so unique about you is that you love each other better than most of the other churches that I've worked with. So I'm confident that a community where you expect God's power to show up and you love each other, I'm confident in that community that God will complete what he's begun. I don't have any doubts. So, but Paul is writing probably his most optimistic letter, and do you know where he's writing it from?
Prison.
He's writing it from a Roman prison. And you would think that Paul would say, well, right now I guess I'm sort of on the bench watching. I can't really do any ministry, so I'm just going to encourage you. But what does he say? Does he say there's nothing that I can do? He's saying, you know what? God's actually using my circumstance to do ministry right now. And how is he doing ministry? That the whole Roman guard now knows about Jesus. And Paul being an evangelist, I can just picture him. The way that they did things is they changed the prisoner, they changed Paul to a different Roman guard every 4 hours. And if you have the gift of chatter, Paul probably did, that he probably spent those 4 hours talking to those guards and say, is there anything I could be praying for? How are things going on with your family? Are you feeling sick in any way? Can I pray for you? And I've got a feeling that by the time he had gone through that rotation, that there were a whole bunch of Roman soldiers who were in a relationship with Jesus. So he didn't see his situation as a barrier. He saw his situation, even the one that we would say would be a hopeless situation, he saw it as an opportunity. And I think sometimes we look at our lives and we think, well, I'm not really at a point of life where God can do much through me. I'm too busy, or I don't have the finances, or I'm not healthy enough. And we think that, well, maybe when this time comes, then God will be able to use me, and I'll be able to do some kind of ministry. But what Paul invites us to do is not wait until the situation changes, but to pray that God will use whatever situation we're in, to the people that God will put in our lives in that situation, to bless them, to minister to them. That our perspective makes all the difference. I remember the story of Susanna Wesley, the mother of John and Charles Wesley, that really began the Methodist movement. Do you know how many kids she had? 19. She had 19 kids, and because they were so poor, her husband much of the time was in debtor's prison. So she was basically raising these 19 kids by herself. And she homeschooled them. She taught all of them Greek by the age of 10. And she shared her faith with them. And did she see herself as being cheated out of opportunities in life? No, she didn't see herself as being cheated. As she spent her hour every day putting her apron over her head praying, she knew her kids wouldn't bother her, or they knew that they shouldn't bother her. But she basically had a perspective that said, I have a great opportunity. There's not many people who have an opportunity to influence the world as much as I do. And other people would think, well, you're just a stay-at-home mom, what can you do? But you know what Susanna Wesley wrote? She said, I hope the fire I start will not only burn all of London, but all of the United Kingdom as well. I hope it will burn all over the world. Does that sound like a subdued woman who doesn't feel like what she's doing is important? And you know, she got her prayer answered. That fire did eventually burn all over the world. by this woman who could have just said, well, I guess I can't do anything for God. She saw herself as being in a situation of opportunity. So, how do you see your situation right now? Do you see the opportunities, or do you see the limitations? So that was for Paul. He saw the opportunities. But as he was in prison, now what's going on in Philippi? In Philippi, there are people who are stepping up now to fill in the mission work that Paul was doing. So in many ways, by removing the pastor, it empowers other people to do ministry. So it's actually a positive thing in that way. So if I left for a while, it would actually be a benefit, because it would empower you to do things. What's going on is that there are some who are just wanting to carry on the ministry of Paul because they know he's in prison and their motives are great. We just want to keep doing what Paul was doing. And there are some in Philippi that have worse motives. Their motives are, we finally got rid of Paul. He thought he was so important. Now we can be the important people. And what does Paul say? Does he care about whether their motives are good or bad? No, he just cares that they're sharing the message of Jesus. So just as I was mentioning, do we wait until our circumstances change for God to use us? No. Do we wait for our motivations to be perfect before we serve Jesus? No. Because maybe some of us are going through things where we're doubting, we're struggling, and we're thinking, well, I don't have perfect faith, so I really can't share my faith with anybody else. Maybe you're the person who can share your faith because they see an integrity in you. You know what? They're going through difficulties and they still trust Jesus. Or maybe you're angry at God. And you're thinking, well, I've got to wait till I stop being angry at God to tell people about Jesus. And maybe you're exactly the person that people need to hear. Because they think, I'm angry and God will never love me, I'll never be able to talk to God. And they see you as someone who trusts God and can be angry at God at the same time. Even while your motivations might not be perfect, it's not time to wait until you get them perfect, because they never will be perfect. It's time to share your faith where you are. So, Paul had gotten to a place in life where he was confident. He was confident that he was in a win-win situation. If I die, I win. I get to go and be with Jesus. If I live, I win. I get to serve you. And I think much of Christian maturity is getting to that place where we're so confident that we're in good hands, that who do we live for? We don't need to live for ourselves anymore because we're in God's hands. So what does Paul figure out? You know what, if I could choose, I would die and go and be with Jesus. That would be the best case scenario. But since I understand what my life is not about me, my life is about serving you, I'm pretty confident that God will keep me alive so I can keep on serving you. Either way, it's a win-win situation. And I think that's part of what, as a pastor, I hope I can bring people to that place where you're confident enough in God's love that it's a win-win situation. If you die, you know where you're going, and if you live, you know what you're living for. And it's not for yourself, it's to serve other people. So Paul basically goes on to say, so now, if you die, you're in good hands. If you live, one of those next verses that is popular for Philippians, live a life worthy of the gospel. Live a life worthy of the calling to which you've been called. So it's interesting some of the imagery that he's using there, that Philippi is a Roman colony. That basically the Roman colonies, if you walked into Philippi, it would look just like you were walking into Rome. The architecture, the culture, the food, everything would be just like you were in a different area of Rome. And they took pride in their Roman citizenship. That they thought that we are more blessed than everyone else because we're a citizen of Rome. And so they would live in a different way because of their citizenship. So what Paul is saying is, in the same way, your ultimate citizenship is in a much better place than Philippi or even Rome. Your citizenship is in heaven. And so just as people would be jealous if they weren't citizens of Rome, of people who had citizenship, the whole point what Paul was saying is, live in such a way that people can tell where you're from, so that they're jealous of the way you live, and they want what you have. They want the same citizenship you have. And does that look like people who are uptight and judgmental and stressed out? Is that the citizenship we're supposed to show people that it looks like to be from heaven? No, we're to be showing our citizenship by serving, by loving, by being people of grace, by being people who are gentle, by being people who care. and that others can see that's the kind of citizenship I want. I want that same kind of relationship. But the way he finishes the section for today is to say, don't just live out this life as an individual citizen of the kingdom of heaven, though that's important. But he's wanting to remind them to live it together in unity. So the last image that he shares that would have been familiar to people in Philippi was an image of confidence. He said, stand shoulder to shoulder with each other. And the picture he's giving is of a phalanx. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it right, phalanx? Where the soldiers would come together so close and their shields would just be connecting with each other, and there'd be 8 people deep. And basically, when an enemy would see that phalanx come in, they would lose heart and they would give up, because they knew that they couldn't defeat them. What Paul is saying is that when you stand shoulder to shoulder as citizens of the kingdom of heaven, without any gap between you, that the enemy will give up because he knows there's no hope of winning the situation. So stand shoulder to shoulder with each other, loving each other, serving each other, trusting in the power of God. And not only will you be blessed, but the enemy will give up because he knows that this is a community where he's not going to be able to get a foothold. So what is it? We had a whole bunch of things. Usually I just try to get one thing across. But a few things to think about this week. One is, look at your situations not for the limitation, but for the opportunity. That wherever you're at, maybe you're spending all day in the hospice with a relative. That's not a limitation, that's an opportunity. That look at your motivation. Even when you're struggling to have perfect faith, don't see that as a limitation, but see that as an opportunity to be in conversation with someone else who might be struggling. And don't see your life as being something that's about saving yourself. Because if we're in Christ, He'll take care of us. But to understand that the reason we're given this life is not for us, but for each other. And finally, to just live that life as a citizen of heaven. That the way we can best witness, and Lutherans, we like hearing this, the best witness we have is by people watching the way we live. Because Lutherans, we're not as good about talking, but we can live in front of people. And so to live in a way that shows love and grace and peace and joy, and stand shoulder to shoulder with each other. And we will make an influence in our community. And the one who began a good work in us will complete it. Amen.